I want to pick up where Don left off by trying to sort of flesh out the landscape a little bit and spend a minute or two just looking at what we know about the landscape of professional development, since that is, after all, what brings all of us on this conference call together. And I would suggest that there are at least five aspects of this. The first is the new educational landscape. And by that I mean not only the trends that Don has referred to, but also the fact that Jewish education itself today encompasses many more spheres of activity than perhaps we typically thought about when many of us were first starting out in the field. So that today the educational landscape not only includes traditional institutions like synagogues and day schools and youth programs and camps, but it also includes new types of settings and venues for Jewish education. Jewish education that's part of service learning programs, Jewish education that's part of cultural programs. And all of those arenas, I would suggest, are arenas in which professional development is relevant. And in some cases, professional development is absolutely vital and frequently missing. So it's an expanded educational landscape, and that, I think, colors the way in which we need to think about professional development in the 21st century. Secondly, we know that there are new models of professional development. Again, when I was starting out in the field, when people said professional development, they generally thought about workshops or seminars or perhaps conferences. Today we know that more and more professional development is being embedded into the educational settings themselves. There's a strong movement that argues that the most effective professional development is professional development that is directly linked to the work that educators are doing. And professional development, therefore, has yielded all sorts of new models, everything from lesson study to professional learning communities that function within educational institutions, etc. We also have new delivery systems, and certainly at the head of that list is the use of technology as a delivery system for professional development. People are no longer limited by physical propinquity or proximity. Now you can do professional development, or at least some types of professional development, wherever you are, and have access to a vastly greater array of resources. The fourth trend that I would cite underscores something that Don noted, and that is that there's a growing demand to demonstrate impact. One of the questions that we hear very often, and that I imagine you do as well, is, well, can you show me that professional development really makes a difference? Can you demonstrate that professional development leads to different outcomes, not just for the educators, but for the learners? And that's a hard nut to crack, because, to be honest, certainly in the Jewish educational world, and even to some extent in the general world, we don't have a lot of good evidence for the direct connection between professional development and learner outcomes. And finally, of course, limited resources, which Don already talked about. We're all operating in a climate of economic scarcity, or at least apparent economic scarcity. And that means that we have to often feel that we're being asked to do more with less. And as wonderful as that notion sounds, it isn't always that feasible. Don, if you want to flip to the next slide. Some of you will recall that a few years ago we did a project at the Lippman Canfer Institute together with CAGE, in which we brought together a number of educators and followed up the deliberation, which took place in St. Louis, and Michelle was one of our hosts for that, with a survey that we did of several hundred CAGE members. And I just thought it would be interesting to trot out what we learned in that survey. It's not that long ago, just a couple of years, about what educators said were the challenges that they were facing. Jewish educators said were the major challenges they were facing. And I'll just tick some of these off. We don't have to spend and don't have a lot of time to spend on each of them. First of all, time pressures. And that means time pressures both on educators themselves, but also on the families and the people who are the consumers of Jewish learning. Second of all, the challenge of individualizing learning. And again, we know that in today's environment, more and more emphasis is being placed on individualization, differentiated instruction, other modes of individualizing the learning process. And that's a major challenge that educators face. A third challenge is parental involvement, and this actually cuts two ways. On the one hand, getting parents involved. How do we make sure that parents really are aligned with what we're trying to do as educators? But also, in a certain sense, the opposite. Parents who are, in a certain sense, overly involved, the so-called helicopter parents, who may be, in a certain sense, creating a new context within which educators need to be attending not only to the learners, the children, if that's the kind of education we're talking about, but also to the parents. Another challenge, using more experiential approaches. Again, this is something which seems to be affecting all of Jewish education. It's no longer the case that people even in day schools are satisfied to say, look, we do our teaching in classrooms. There's a greater demand in that regard. Integrating technology. Technology presents us with huge opportunities, but it's also really challenging to make use of technology. Some of you know that we at JESNA have been doing a project that we call Jewish Education 3.0 for a number of years. And if you go to our website and put in a /JE3, it will take you to a special sub-site of the JESNA website, jesna.org/JE3, which has a range of articles and resources and news about developments in technology. It's a huge arena, but it's one that's very challenging for us to master. Helping learners find meaning. There's been a shift, in a certain sense, in what Jewish education is about. It's not about the transmission of information any longer, as much as it is about how to help learners, again, of all ages, find meaning in their Jewishness. Dealing with diversity. We face a Jewish community and Jewish institutions that are today more diverse than ever before. The diversity extends to different family types. The diversity extends to different learning modalities, which ties back to the individualized learning. And the diversity extends to the fact that there are many people that we're dealing with who, in some cases, are the products of interfaith families and are bringing all sorts of new issues into the educational settings. And finally, the challenge of delivering high-level Jewish content. With all else that we're talking about, how do we continue to offer Jewish content that is rich and that really presents Judaism not as something that is pediatric, but as something that mature individuals will want to embrace because it has something to say about their lives.